Boom. I've got to share a story just on a memory that popped up recently. I was, as you can see, weird way to start a story. I was on my front porch clipping my nails and clipping my nails. I sweep them off into the garden and, head on my way. And, those moments where you do something, you smell something, you see something that brings you back to a memory of a past time or something that struck you. And it brought me back to one of my favorites. So, when you get to your first team or your first spot in the military, the folks that you went through basic training with and then show up and are kind of what are we consider new guys at that part of your career, that's your family. That's the people sort of earn those initial stripes and licks with, and then get to move on at the beginning of what would turn out to be an otherworldly adventure. And one of those guys, I'm just going to call Red. Red was an enlisted guy. Very interesting kind of nuance to the SEAL teams is I think the officer enlisted relationship in the SEAL teams is unique. I don't know anywhere else in the military where that level of kind of friendship wrapped and kind of connected to great leadership, followership, teamwork, and moving forward together with tremendous respect and discipline works in the way it works there. There are a lot of other units where not an officer wouldn't get connected to his troops and be close, but the separation would be huge. And as you go through your career, there are times where you need to have more separation than others. But that first group of folks you travel or start the adventure with, that you have a special spot in your heart for them. And some of those, many of whom are enlisted, I count as my very best and closest friends. Red was one of those. I remember one day I'm coming over. I think we're going out just to, go out on the weekend. I am certain we were heading to a strip club because Red and some of those guys really enjoyed that. I can't say I didn't at that age, but probably not something I need to share any more details of. But we're getting ready to go out. We show up at his house. Red is getting ready, and amongst a bunch of other people, I'm watching Red, and he's clipping his fingernails, and he's putting them in this little pouch. It wasn't just like a garbage bag. It wasn't like a Ziploc bag. It was like a pouch almost made to take your fingernails. And so I'm kind of like perseverating on this as he's doing it. So he does his fingernails, he does his toenails. They all go in this pouch, and I was like, what's going on with that pouch? He's like, oh, nothing. I just, don't want to get fingernails all over the place. I knew that wasn't the case. I could see something was going on there. And I was like, really? I was like, I get it. You could do it in the bathroom though, over a garbage can or something like that. That pouch looks like purposeful. What's going on there? He's like, nah, it's a superstition. You wouldn't understand. And now I'm like hooked. How are you going to not try and like pick at that to figure out what's going on? I was like, come on, man. Who has a pouch for fingernails that's a superstition that I need to know more about what's going on here. He's like, well, I grew up, as I knew. He grew up outside of New Orleans, somewhere in Louisiana, and rough. He grew up rough. Red came from the streets. He had a tough background, spent plenty of time probably doing things that would have ended up in a very different place if he hadn't found us, and that was kind of his personality. And look, this guy, let me just put on top of this, is one of the greatest operators, warriors this country has ever produced. Creative, smart, disciplined, team-oriented, devious, unbelievable operator. And he looks like a demon. I mean, he's tight, compact, looks like a wrestler, blazing red hair. One of the last people I would ever want to get in an actual fight with. That's him. So he's like, well, I grew up in Louisiana, and a good part of Louisiana is Cajun country, and there's superstitions out there, and this is kind of one of those. He just is unwilling to give it up. I was like, yep, keep going. He's like, nah, I cut those fingernails just to make sure nobody can put a root on me. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I don't want somebody to put a root on me. And I said, a root? He's like, yeah. I was like, are you saying root? Like ROOT or something else? He's like, no, yeah, ROOT, but we say root. And I said, okay, and what does that mean? He's like, well, if you had like a voodoo gal or like a shadow man voodoo practitioner, that comes from a history of making, herbs and tinctures and root vegetables to kind of make concoctions, both for, health and wellness, but it can also be used for, the dark arts. So if somebody puts a root on you, it's like, it's like bad juju. And I was like a spell? He's like, yeah, like a spell. I was like, so what's up with the fingernails? He's like, well, if they got some of your hair or your fingernails, then they could add that to the concoction and really get you. And I'm like, this is the best thing I ever heard in my life. And so I let it go. He carries on. And then 5 minutes later, he comes back out. We're going out and we're going to kind of a rough part of town. All of a sudden, Red has a pair of gloves on, like medical gloves. And when we shoot, we do a lot of shooting in the military. Obviously, when you shoot, in particular pistol work, you'll shoot cheap ammo because ammo's expensive and you just shoot a bunch of cheap ammo. But then when you load your guns in case you're going to get in a fight, you put the good ammo in, hollow points or something good. I'm watching Little Red take every piece of brass, every bullet, and wipe it down with, like a rag, and then put it into the magazine. And I was like, what's going on there? And he looked at me like, how could you ask the question? He said, well, you don't want to leave fingerprints at the scene of the crime. And I was like, no, you don't. It just occurred to me in this moment that having grown up in the heart of Silicon Valley, where you can't buy a half-acre piece of dirt for out $3 million in the town I grew up in because of that whole tech world. Not when I lived there. It was like a normal place to grow up. But I played like a private school sport, played at a private college at that sport. And now I'm sitting in this room with a guy clipping his nails, not wanting to have a voodoo spell put on him, and he's wiping brass off in case we get in a fight that night and wouldn't leave fingerprints behind. I tell this story for two reasons. One, I just like telling the story and thinking about it. Two, having people like this in your life is the good stuff. I think sometimes we get entrenched in just the people we're around, the normal little peer group and folks we occupy our time with. Every once in a while, you got to step out of that. Find somebody wild. Find somebody that has a completely different upbringing, focus, and way of doing things. I promise you it will be the spice of life. Ever onward.